A misdirected envelope, a reply that should never have come, and a woman whose desperate words would pierce the armor of the most guarded man in New York society. What begins as a mistake becomes destiny. What begins as a secret becomes revolution. One letter changes everything. Eleanor Ashford never expected her heart to reach the hands of a stranger. A letter meant for her brother, a plea for help, a confession of desperation, lands instead on the mahogany desk of Nathaniel Crane, the railroad magnate whose name whispers power through every corridor of high society. She is nobody to him, a woman without fortune, without influence, fighting to save her family from ruin. But Nathaniel, moved by something he cannot name, responds. His reply ignites a correspondence that will shake the very foundations of New York's elite. Their words become a refuge, their secret becomes dangerous, and in the glittering, merciless world of the Gilded Age, some loves are worth everything, even destruction. Subscribe and join us as this forbidden connection transforms two souls and challenges an empire. The autumn rain hammered against the window panes of the Ashford townhouse like it possessed a grudge. Eleanor sat in the dim light of her bedroom, her fingers trembling as they held the pen. The paper before her was expensive, borrowed from her mother's writing desk, and she knew what she was about to do was foolish, desperate, unforgivable perhaps. But desperation had a way of erasing caution. The numbers had stopped making sense 3 months ago. Her father's business ventures had crumbled. The creditors came at night now, their voices harsh through the parlor doors. Her mother pretended not to hear them. Her sister, Margaret, beautiful Margaret, who was supposed to marry the Vanderbilt heir, had nothing to offer now but a tainted name. And Eleanor. Eleanor was simply the forgotten daughter who had learned to make her own dresses and smile through social gatherings where she no longer belonged. She dipped her pen into the inkwell and began to write. "Dear Edward," she started, addressing her older brother who had moved to Chicago 5 years ago, before the decline, before everything fell apart. "I write to you because I have nowhere else to turn. The situation here has become dire. Father refuses to acknowledge the extent of our losses. Mother spends her days in silence. The house will be seized within months unless—" She paused, unable to finish the sentence. The words felt too heavy, too humiliating. The clock in the hallway chimed midnight as she worked through her confession. She told him everything. The debts, the shame, the way the ladies of Fifth Avenue no longer received her mother, the way her dreams of an independent life, of perhaps opening a small bookshop, of being something more than ornamental, had become laughable fantasies. By the time she finished, tears had blurred the ink. She sealed the envelope with shaking hands, addressing it to her brother's business office. She would mail it herself in the morning, when the servants were occupied. No one must know. But in her haste, in the darkness of pre-dawn when she crept to the post office, Eleanor made a terrible mistake. The address that came from her memory was incomplete. The years had erased the details, and when the letter was sorted, misrouted, and carried uptown to an entirely different Manhattan address, Eleanor Ashford had no idea that her private devastation was about to land on the desk of a man she had never met. Nathaniel Crane received 50 letters per day, from business associates, from society climbers, from women hoping to catch the attention of New York's most eligible bachelor, a man who seemed constitutionally incapable of being caught. His secretary, the efficient Mr. Hartwell, filtered them ruthlessly. Most went into the waste bin, but this one was different. It was not the paper that caught his attention, though it was clearly expensive, the kind of stationery that belonged to old families, established names. It was not the handwriting, though it was lovely, careful, educated, but marked by urgency. It was the first line, glimpsed as he sorted through the stack before his morning meeting. "I write to you because I have nowhere else to turn." Something in that sentence made him stop, something in the raw honesty of it. Nathaniel was 41 years old. He had built an empire from nothing, from his father's modest shipping interests into a railroad dynasty that now sprawled across 3 states. He was ruthless in business, efficient in society, and utterly alone in a way that no amount of wealth could remedy. He kept people at a careful distance. They wanted his money, his name, his position. He had learned long ago to want very little from them in return. But this letter wanted nothing from him. It was not written for him. It was a confession meant for someone else. A sister's despair meant for a brother's ears. He read it twice, then 3 times. Against the advice of every rational instinct, Nathaniel Crane sat down and began to write a response. "Dear Edward," he wrote, his hand moving across the paper with surprising ease, "I am not the man to whom this letter was intended, but I am the man to whom it arrived, and I cannot, in good conscience, allow your sister's plea to go unanswered. I do not know you, I do not know her, but I know what it means to have everything and nothing at the same time. I know what desperation sounds like when it is honest. I will help. The how and why are less important than the fact of it. Reply to this address when you are ready." He signed his name without his title, simply Nathaniel. The response he received came 3 weeks later, not from Edward Ashford, who, it turned out, had moved to London and was unreachable, but from Eleanor herself. She had intercepted his letter. She had understood, with a shock that left her breathless, that her private humiliation had been read by a stranger, and instead of shame, what burned in her was something far more dangerous: hope. "Mr. Crane," she wrote, her handwriting less careful now, marked with emotion, "you were not meant to know my name, my situation, my weakness, but now that you do, now that somehow Providence has placed this bridge between us, I find I must ask, was that your intention in responding? To help a stranger? Or is there some other reason a man of your standing would risk his reputation by corresponding with a woman he does not know?" The question hung between them like electricity. Eleanor sealed that envelope herself. This time, she got the address exactly right. When Nathaniel read her words, read the challenge in them, the defiance, the intelligence, he felt something shift in his chest, something he thought had calcified long ago. He understood then that this was no longer about charity. This was about connection. This was about 2 people who had found each other by mistake in a city of millions. And in that moment, sitting alone in his study with rain falling outside and her letter burning in his hands, Nathaniel Crane made a decision that would change everything. He wrote back, and he would not stop writing. In the months that followed, Eleanor Ashford would receive a letter every week, sometimes twice a week, delivered to a post office box that she opened under an assumed name. Nathaniel wrote about his business, his philosophy, his loneliness. Eleanor wrote about literature, about dreams she had abandoned, about the woman she might have been in another life. They never met. They never spoke. But through their words they became known to each other in a way that transcended the boundaries of propriety, social class, and the rigid structures of Gilded Age society. And neither of them understood yet that this secret correspondence was building towards something that would shake their world to its foundation. The secret burned between them like a flame in the darkness, growing warmer, growing brighter, growing impossible to contain. The post office on Madison Avenue became Eleanor's sanctuary. Every Thursday morning, she would walk there with her heart racing, praying that this week's letter would be waiting. It became routine, this desperate ritual. Her mother thought her occupied with charitable visits. Her sister believed she had taken an interest in the public library. The servants saw only a young woman exercising and concluded she was becoming healthier, more color in her cheeks. What they could not see was the transformation happening within her. With each letter from Nathaniel, Eleanor was becoming someone new, someone alive, someone seen. His first letters were careful, businesslike. He wrote about the challenges of managing a railroad empire, the corruption he witnessed in high finance, the way power corrupted even the most principled men. Eleanor devoured these letters like scripture, reading passages 2 and 3 times. She wrote back with observations that surprised them both. She had opinions about economics, about labor practices, about the exploitation that built great fortunes. Nathaniel had not encountered a woman who engaged with ideas this way. Society women discussed fashion and gossip. Eleanor discussed justice. "You challenge me, Miss Ashford," he wrote in his 7th letter. "I am not accustomed to being challenged by anyone. I find that I am beginning to require it." Eleanor sat in the post office holding that letter and felt her hands shake. She began to write back with less reserve. She told him about her childhood, about her father's decline, about the specific moment when she understood that the life she had been raised to expect would never materialize. She wrote about her mother's silent suffering, about the way her sister Margaret had aged 10 years in the span of 3 months. "But I find," she wrote, "that there is a strange freedom in the loss of false expectations. I spent so many years preparing to be a wife, to be decorative, to be silent. Now that I am free from that obligation, I discover that I might have been useful. I might have been powerful. I might have been myself. Is that wicked of me to acknowledge?" His response came quickly. "It is not wicked, it is honest. I have spent my entire life building things, railroads, fortunes, empires, and I have discovered that I have built nothing that matters. No home, no true companionship, no understanding with another soul. You ask if you might be powerful. You already are. From the very first letter, the one that was not meant for me, you have had power over me. I do not know what to do with that power, but I know that I am changed by it." Eleanor paused in the reading of that line. The post office suddenly felt too small, too public. She folded the letter carefully and pressed it against her heart. By the spring of 1887, their correspondence had transformed into something neither of them could deny. They were not mere acquaintances exchanging pleasantries. They were confidants. They were something else entirely, something unnamed and dangerous. Nathaniel began writing about his own pain, the father who had never considered him good enough, the business associates who respected only his money, the women of society who saw him as a prize to be won, the profound isolation of standing at the top of every room and feeling utterly alone. "When I read your letters," he confessed, "I feel less like a specimen. I feel like a man, just a man, with fears and doubts and a desperate need to matter to someone. I do not expect that someone to be you. But I have begun to pray that you will not disappoint me by ceasing to write." Eleanor responded with vulnerability she had shown to no other person. "I will not cease. I cannot. These letters have become my breath, Mr. Crane. This correspondence is the only honest thing in my life. Everything else is performance. Everything else is pretense. But here, in these pages, I am fully myself. And you see me. Against all reason, you see me." By summer, they began to reference real places, real meetings that were not meetings. Eleanor would write that she would be at Central Park on a particular afternoon. Nathaniel would be there, on a different path at a different time, just knowing she was nearby. They never spoke. They never acknowledged each other. But they existed in the same spaces, separated by distance and propriety, connected by something far more intimate than a handshake. "I saw you on the promenade yesterday," Eleanor wrote after one of these non-encounters. "You were wearing a grey coat. The sun caught your hair, and for a moment I remembered that you were real, that all of this is real, that I am not writing to a phantom of my imagination." "I saw you," Nathaniel replied. "I have memorized your face now. I carry it with me everywhere. This is both the greatest happiness and the deepest torture I have ever known." By autumn, the letters had become poetry, fragments of passion barely contained by the proper language of the era. If circumstances were different, Eleanor began one letter. "They are not different. Nathaniel finished in his reply. "And yet everything has changed anyway. I do not know what future, if any, we have. But I know that I cannot continue living in a world where you exist, and I do not claim you openly. Somehow, I must find a way to make this real, not in secret, not in the spaces between our words. Real." Eleanor read that letter 100 times. She understood what he was saying. She understood the impossible thing he was asking her to contemplate. And terrified as she was, she understood that she had already made her choice. She had made it the moment she intercepted a letter meant for her brother. She had made it with every word she had written since. In late October, Nathaniel's letter arrived with a different weight to it, different dimensions. Eleanor opened it with trembling fingers and found, inside the envelope, a proposal. Not romantic, not yet, but practical. A way forward. "I have secured a position for your brother Edward in my London office," Nathaniel had written. "This is not charity, though I know it will seem so. Your family's debts will be covered through a business arrangement between myself and your father that will be perfectly legitimate, perfectly respectable. Your mother will have a home. Your sister's reputation can be salvaged. And you, Eleanor, you will be free to make your own choices, not out of desperation, out of possibility." Eleanor wept when she read it. She wept because he had understood. He had understood that she could not, would not, choose him from a position of weakness, that she needed to be whole before she could be his, that love, if it came between them, must come from a place of equal ground. She wrote back immediately, "You have given me back my life. No, you have given me a new one. One I did not know was possible. Mr. Crane, I do not know how to thank you. I do not know how to measure this. I only know that when I look at my future now, I see something bright. And in that brightness, I see you, not as a savior, but as a possibility. When my family situation has been resolved, when I have established myself as an independent woman with my own means, then we must have a conversation, face to face, real, and we must speak the words that our letters have only circled around. Until then," Nathaniel wrote in response, "I will wait. I will be patient. I will rebuild my life around the hope that you, Eleanor Ashford, might one day choose to share it with me. Not out of obligation, not out of rescue, but out of the same recognition that has bound us through these months of beautiful, burning words." Eleanor held that letter and understood that everything was about to change. In her pocket, she carried the address of a woman in Brooklyn who offered voice lessons and a false name to respectable clients. She was going to become someone. She was going to build something. She was going to make herself worthy of the love that burned in Nathaniel Crane's carefully chosen words. And when she was ready, truly ready, she would answer the greatest question of her life. The winter of 1887 descended on New York like a judgment. Snow piled in the streets. The wind cut through the avenues like a blade. And in the frozen darkness, Eleanor began her transformation. The money that Nathaniel had quietly arranged came through a series of business transactions so carefully structured that no hint of charity touched them. Her father, initially suspicious, was eventually convinced by a lawyer of Nathaniel's choosing that this was a legitimate investment opportunity. The family's debts were cleared, slowly, carefully, without scandal. Eleanor watched her mother relax for the first time in years, watched her sister Margaret's face lose its hunted expression. But the real revolution came in Eleanor herself. She had saved enough money, carefully, penny by penny from her small household allowance, to rent a small studio in a respectable building on the Upper West Side. No one knew about it. It was registered under a false name. A widow, the landlord believed. A quiet woman devoted to voice training and music lessons. Eleanor became that woman 3 afternoons a week. The woman who taught her, Mrs. Hendricks, a former opera singer with knowing eyes, asked few questions. "You want to be heard," she had said simply at their first meeting. "That is enough." Eleanor did want to be heard. She wanted to sing. She wanted to speak. She wanted to stand in front of people and have her voice matter. The lessons transformed her. She discovered that she had talent, not extraordinary perhaps, but genuine, honest. By February, she was singing in small private concerts for intellectual gatherings in Manhattan. Nothing scandalous, nothing that would reach her mother's ears or her sister's acquaintances. Just enough to build a reputation, a network, a foothold in a world that valued women with something to offer beyond their family names. And through it all, she and Nathaniel continued to write. But something had begun to shift in those letters. Nathaniel, despite his careful restraint, was beginning to push against the boundaries of their secret arrangement. He wanted more. He wanted to see her. He wanted to be seen with her. He wanted the world to know. "This hiding, this secrecy, it is becoming unbearable," he wrote in March. "I sit in rooms full of people, and I'm entirely alone, because the only woman I wish to speak to is the one I must pretend I do not know. How long can we continue this?" Eleanor understood his frustration. She felt it too, the ache of their separation. But she also understood something he was only beginning to grasp, that his world and hers did not exist in the same space. They occupied different spheres entirely, and bridging them would require more than love. It would require revolution. She tried to make him understand this in her letters. "You are a man of power, Mr. Crane. That power is vast, but it has limits. It cannot change the fact that I have no fortune, no family name of significance, no connections in society. If we were to appear together publicly, the speculation would be immediate. The conclusions drawn would be damning. You are not interested in scandal. You tell me your reputation is all you have built, and I am not interested in becoming anyone's mistress, secret or otherwise. There must be a third path. We must find it together." But as spring turned to summer and Eleanor's independence grew, she began to sense something else. There were complications emerging. People had begun to notice her, the quiet woman with the remarkable voice. A journalist had written a small notice about her performance at a society gathering. An impresario had suggested she might perform in a more public venue. She was becoming visible, becoming known, and at precisely the same moment, whispers began to circulate about Nathaniel Crane. They were subtle at first, the kind of society gossip that moved through drawing rooms like smoke. Nathaniel had been seen repeatedly in different parts of the city at odd hours. He was no longer attending the social events where he was expected to appear. There was speculation about a woman. There was the beginning of scandal. Eleanor became aware of it through her mother, who mentioned it carefully over tea one afternoon in June. "They say Mr. Crane is distracted," her mother said quietly, "that some woman has captured his attention. I imagine it must be someone quite extraordinary to interest a man like that." Eleanor's heart had stopped. That evening she rushed to the post office and found a letter waiting. Nathaniel's handwriting was agitated. Angry, almost. "I have grown tired of discretion, Eleanor. I have grown tired of being careful. I am 42 years old, and I have spent my entire life doing what was expected, building what was expected, being who was expected, and I have discovered that I have built nothing real, nothing that matters. You are real, you matter. And I will no longer pretend otherwise. I am going to take action. I am going to make a choice. I am going to claim what I want, and I will not ask your permission, though I am asking, begging for your understanding." Eleanor read that letter and understood that everything was about to explode. She was right. 3 days later, society learned that Nathaniel Crane was withdrawing from several business ventures. He was consolidating his empire. He was making significant philanthropic contributions to music education for women. He was, quite deliberately, doing things that did not fit the expectations placed upon him. And then came the moment that changed everything. Eleanor was performing at a small concert, a private gathering of intellectuals and artists in a townhouse on the Upper East Side. She was singing a piece she had chosen deliberately, a haunting melody about impossible love. She stood on a small stage, her voice filling the room, and she felt the presence of someone standing in the back, watching. When she turned slightly, she saw him. Nathaniel was there, publicly, deliberately, watching her as if she was the only person in the world. His presence was an announcement. It was a declaration. It was the shattering of every careful boundary they had constructed. She did not stop singing. She could not. But her voice changed. It became something raw, something true, something that laid bare every emotion she had held back for months. When she finished, there was silence, then applause. And through it all, Nathaniel's eyes never left her face. After the concert, as she stood in the drawing room accepting congratulations from people whose names she could barely register, Nathaniel approached her. It was the first time in all those months that they had been in the same room, close enough to touch. "Miss Ashford," he said, and there was a challenge in his voice. A decision made. "I wonder if you might allow me to escort you to dinner next week. I find myself eager to continue a conversation that has been far too long confined to the page." The room went silent. Every person present understood the implication. Nathaniel Crane, one of the richest men in New York, was publicly asking an unknown woman with no family connection to dine with him. It was not scandal yet, but it was the opening move in what would become scandal. Eleanor felt her heart burning in her chest. She understood what he was doing. She understood what this would cost him. And she understood that she loved him too much to let him make this sacrifice. "Mr. Crane," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I am deeply honored. However, I find that I must decline, not because of propriety, but because I have something to tell you, something that changes everything. I wonder if we might find a more private place to speak." She saw the confusion flash across his face, saw the moment when he realized she was not accepting his declaration, and she also saw the moment when he understood that she was not rejecting him either. They found themselves in a small study, away from the crowd. For the first time in all those months they faced each other in the flesh, not separated by the page. "I am leaving New York," Eleanor said without preamble. "I have been offered a position, a real position, not a charity, to study music theory in Paris, with a woman who trained at the conservatory. I have accepted. I leave in 2 weeks." Nathaniel's face went very still. "You are leaving?" "Yes, not because of you, because of me, because I need to build something. Because I need to know who I am when I'm standing on my own, without the weight of my family or my dependence on anyone else. I need to prove to myself that I am not accepting you out of desperation, that when I choose you, if I choose you, it is a true choice." "Eleanor." His voice was rough, broken. "This was always the plan," she said gently. "From the moment I wrote that letter to my brother. From the moment you chose to respond, we were always building toward this, toward me becoming someone, toward you choosing something real instead of maintaining the appearance of someone you were never meant to be." "How long?" he asked. "How long will you be gone? 2 years, perhaps 3, I do not know exactly. Long enough to study, long enough to perform, long enough to establish myself. And then I will come home. To me, to myself first. And then perhaps we will discover if what we built through letters can survive in the real world. But Mr. Crane, I cannot ask you to wait. I cannot ask you to sacrifice your reputation, your standing, your future, on the hope that I will return the same woman who is leaving. That would be a different kind of love, a selfish kind." He moved toward her then, close enough to touch, though he did not. "You think I am capable of waiting 3 years for the chance to know you as more than letters and glimpses across a park? I think you are capable of anything you choose to be capable of." I think you are a man who has spent his entire life doing exactly what he wanted to do and dressing it up in the language of obligation. I think that is what I love about you, your fundamental honesty beneath all the careful restraint. If you leave, Nathaniel said, and there was something ancient in his voice, something primal, I will wait, every day, every year, for as long as it takes. This is not sacrifice, Eleanor. This is promise. She felt the weight of that promise settle over her like a mantle. She understood that he meant it, that he would wait, that this strange love born from a misdirected letter had fundamentally changed both of them in ways that no amount of distance could undo. I know, she said softly. That is why I can go. That is why I can do this, because you see me, truly see me, and you are willing to let me become fully myself before asking me to become yours. He reached out then and took her hand. It was the first time they had touched, just the simple clasp of hand to hand, but it felt like every letter they had ever written made manifest. It felt like love and longing and impossible hope all crystallized into a single moment. Go, he said, become, build, and when you return to me, I will be waiting, unchanged, waiting. 2 weeks later, Eleanor Ashford boarded a ship to France. She did not look back as the dock receded. She did not need to. She carried Nathaniel Crane with her in her heart, in her memory, in the knowledge that somewhere in New York, a man who had responded to a letter meant for someone else was waiting for her to come home, and she made herself a promise as well. She would return to him transformed. She would return ready. She would return as a woman who had built something of her own, and she would choose him again, but this time freely, completely, forever. 3 years, 1,095 days. Eleanor had counted them in Paris. She had not regretted a single one. The woman who arrived back in New York in the autumn of 1890 was not the Eleanor Ashford who had left. That woman had been desperate, trapped, hopeful only in the way that desperate people hope, with the knowledge that hope itself could be a cruelty. This Eleanor was different. She had performed in concert halls across Paris. She had studied with the masters of her craft. She had earned money through her talent, genuine money, earned through her voice and her skill. She had lived independently. She had made her own choices. She had tasted freedom. She had also thought of Nathaniel nearly every day. His letters had arrived regularly, forwarded through the carefully constructed system she had established before leaving. They were shorter than they had been before. Sadder sometimes. She read passages that made her heart ache. I saw someone who moved like you in the park yesterday, he had written once. I followed them for 3 blocks like a fool before I realized my mistake. That is what I have become without you. A man following strangers, she had written back. Told him about her performances, about the way music had become the language through which she spoke, about how she thought of him when she sang songs about longing and loss, about how every step toward her own independence had been a step toward being worthy of being his. But letters were not the same as presents. And Eleanor, stepping off the ship in New York Harbor with her small trunk and her hard-won independence, suddenly understood that all the careful planning and all the patient waiting had been building toward this singular moment. She sent him a letter. I am home. I am changed. I am ready. If the offer still stands, I would like to have dinner with you, not in secret, not hidden, but openly, in whatever way you wish. I am prepared for whatever comes next. His response came by messenger the very next day. A single sentence written in his careful hand. Tonight, 8 o'clock, my home. Come as yourself. The woman who left me is magnificent. The woman who has returned will be a revolution. Eleanor dressed with care that evening. Not in the latest fashions, though she was fashionable. Not in anything designed to seduce or impress. She dressed as herself, simply, elegantly, the way a woman dresses when she is preparing to meet her own future. The Crane mansion was exactly as she had imagined it. Vast, elegant, carefully controlled. Just like him, A servant, who did not react to seeing her, suggesting Nathaniel had prepared for her arrival, led her to a private dining room where candles burned and a simple meal was laid. And then he came through the door. 3 years had changed him too. His face was lined now, marked by time and waiting, but when he looked at her, she saw the same man who had written to her every week for 3 years, the same man who had responded to a letter that was not meant for him, the same man who had loved her patiently, without demanding anything in return. "Eleanor," he said, and the way he said her name was like music, like finally speaking something that had been unspoken for too long. "Mr. Crane," she replied, and she smiled. "I believe you promised me dinner." He laughed, a sound of such joy that it broke something open in her chest. "I promised you much more than that, if you are willing to hear it." They dined. They talked. For hours, they talked in a way they had never been able to in their letters. They spoke about her time in Paris, about the performances she had given, about the woman she had become. They spoke about his business, his evolution, the way he had fundamentally changed his life in her absence. He had become a patron of the arts. He had funded music education for women. He had, quite deliberately, made himself into a man who might deserve a woman like her. "I thought about you," he said as they sat in the drawing room after dinner. "Every day, I thought about the fact that I had no right to ask you to wait, that you owed me nothing, that if you came back and told me you had found someone else, I would have accepted it as your right." "And yet you waited," Eleanor said. "I waited because there is no one else, Eleanor. There was never anyone else. From the moment I read that letter meant for your brother, there was only ever you. In my mind, in my heart, everywhere I looked." She felt her heart racing. This was the moment. This was the choice she had been building toward for 3 years. "I have a proposal," she said quietly. "Not marriage, not immediately. I have discovered that I am capable of things I never imagined. I want to continue my music. I want to perform. I want to build something in the world. What if? What if we built that together? Not as a dependent and a patron, but as partners, as equals? And if we discover that we still love each other when I am standing fully on my own ground, not needing you, but choosing you, then perhaps we might discuss something more permanent." Nathaniel reached across the space between them and took her hand. It was the same gesture he had made that night 3 years ago in the study, but this time he did not simply hold it. He raised it to his lips and kissed it, slowly, reverently. "I will partner with you in anything," he said. "Build with you, love with you, wait with you, however long it takes. You have already changed my entire life. Asking to do it together is not asking for much. It is asking for everything, and I am ready to give you everything." Outside, the autumn night was dark and cold, but inside Nathaniel Crane's home, something warm and beautiful and real had been born. The letter that had arrived by mistake had led here through years of patient waiting, through transformation and growth, through the slow, careful building of a love that had time to become something more than passion, something eternal. Eleanor spent that night in Nathaniel's home, though not in the way that society would have scandalized about. They sat by the fire and talked until the sun began to rise, about their future, about the concerts she would perform, about the patronage he would provide, about the world they would build together. And when she left his home the next morning, she knew that everything had changed. Everything had become real. The secret was about to become very, very public. By November, all of New York was speaking about it. The railroad magnate Nathaniel Crane had taken an unknown woman, no family name of standing, no fortune of her own, as his public companion. He was seen with her at the opera, at concerts, at intellectual gatherings, and most scandalously, he had announced that he would be funding an entire music hall in her name. The Eleanor Ashford Performance Theatre, he called it. And Eleanor herself would be its first principal artist. Society split into factions. Some whispered with approval. Nathaniel was known to be a man of principle. If he chose to elevate a woman, perhaps there was merit in her that they had not yet discovered. Some saw Eleanor perform and began to understand. Her voice was extraordinary. Her presence was commanding. She was not society, but she was undeniably exceptional. Others were scandalized. The audacity of it, the impropriety, the suggestion that a woman without fortune, without connections, might deserve the attention of one of New York's most powerful men. In the drawing rooms of Fifth Avenue, Eleanor was called worse things than scandalous. She was called ambitious, dangerous, a woman who did not know her place. But the most interesting reaction came from Eleanor's mother. She had known, of course. Eleanor had told her everything, had explained the letters, the transformation, the building of her own life in Paris. And instead of the scandal and outrage that Eleanor had expected, her mother had simply held her hand and said, "You have done what I could never do. You have chosen yourself first. And now you have the privilege of also choosing him. That is not a scandal, darling. That is a triumph." When word reached Nathaniel's family, the reaction was different. Nathaniel had a brother, Oliver, who lived in Boston, and whom Nathaniel had barely spoken to in years. There had been a rift between them, rooted in disagreement about their father's estate. But when Oliver heard about Eleanor, he came to New York. He came to confront Nathaniel, and instead he was confronted by Eleanor herself. They met in Nathaniel's office, Eleanor, Nathaniel, and Oliver Crane, who looked at Eleanor with the kind of examination that men used to assess whether a woman was lying. "My brother tells me you are a musician," Oliver said without preamble, "a woman of no particular family, and yet he is prepared to make you a public figure, to tie his reputation to yours. I want to understand why." Eleanor did not flinch. She had faced worse scrutiny in Paris. She had performed for audiences who came prepared to judge her. She would not be intimidated now. "I will not ask for your approval, Mr. Oliver," she said calmly, "nor will I ask for your understanding. I will simply tell you the truth. Your brother responded to a letter that was not meant for him. And in that response, he gave me the greatest gift a man can give a woman. He gave me the choice to become myself. I have been myself. I have built something. And now I have chosen to build that something with your brother, as an equal, not as someone dependent upon him. If that offends you, I am sorry, but I will not apologize for it." Oliver stared at her for a long moment, and then, to everyone's surprise, he began to laugh. "My God," he said, "you are exactly what he needs, exactly what we all need, people brave enough to reject the world as it is and build the world as it should be." He turned to Nathaniel. "She is formidable. I approve. And I will tell Mother to stop writing me letters about disgrace." After that, the scandal began to shift, not disappear. It was still too delicious for that, but transform. Begin to become less scandal and more possibility. In December, Eleanor performed at her first concert in the newly opened Eleanor Ashford Performance Theatre. The hall was packed. Every significant person in New York was there. Critics came prepared to find fault and instead found themselves moved to tears. She sang not just music, but story. She sang about longing and transformation. She sang about a woman who had been given a choice and had chosen herself. And in the back of the hall, Nathaniel Crane wept openly, without shame, without concern for who might see. When the performance was over, the applause lasted 15 minutes. 15 minutes of a room full of people, many of whom had come to judge her, to find her wanting, acknowledging that they had witnessed something extraordinary. After the curtain fell, Eleanor stood backstage, still in her performance gown, trembling slightly from the intensity of the experience. A young journalist was demanding an interview. A society woman was asking about her background. A director from another theatre was discussing future engagements. But Eleanor heard none of it because Nathaniel had pushed through the crowd and reached her. He was carrying something, a single rose, the kind of gesture that would have seemed trite if it had not contained within it the weight of every letter, every year of waiting, every moment of choice they had made together. "I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you since the moment I read the first line of a letter meant for someone else. I will love you for the rest of my life. And I am asking you now, publicly, in front of God and everyone in this theatre, if you will marry me." Eleanor felt the room go silent. She felt every eye turn to her. She felt the weight of society's judgment and expectation and scandal. And she smiled. "Yes," she said. "Yes, 1,000 times yes, in secret, and now publicly, eternally yes." The applause that erupted was different this time. It was not the applause of people appreciating art. It was the applause of people who had witnessed transformation, who had seen two souls choose each other despite impossible odds, who understood in that moment that love, real love, earned love, love built on choice and equality, was the most revolutionary thing that could exist in their society. When they kissed, their first kiss, happening on the stage of a theatre in front of hundreds of witnesses, it was like the culmination of every unspoken thing that had lived between them, every moment of longing, every patient day of waiting, every choice they had made to honor themselves first and each other second. The scandal transformed overnight. Eleanor Ashford was no longer the ambitious woman without name or family. She was Nathaniel Crane's fiancée, a woman of exceptional talent, a woman who had been chosen not out of necessity, but out of love, a woman who had changed a powerful man's life. The newspapers wrote about it endlessly. The society pages speculated about the wedding. The musical world celebrated her performances. Eleanor Ashford had become, through her own talent and Nathaniel's love, something she could never have been through her family connections. She had become herself, publicly, irrevocably, and in doing so, she had given Nathaniel something he had been searching for his entire life: permission to be something other than what was expected, permission to love freely, permission to be human instead of simply powerful. The letter that had arrived by mistake had led them here, to a moment where scandal became redemption, where impossibility became inevitable, where a man and a woman, unlikely and unconventional, had created something that would reshape their world. But love, no matter how transformative, exists always in a world of competing interests. And in the Gilded Age, even the most revolutionary personal choice could not escape the machinery of power and politics that ran beneath New York's glittering surface. The wedding was to be held in the spring of 1891. It would be, by design, a quiet affair. Nathaniel and Eleanor wanted nothing of the enormous society spectacle that would normally accompany a marriage between one of the city's most powerful men and a woman who had become its most talked-about artist. They planned an intimate ceremony, close family, trusted friends, the theatre community that had embraced Eleanor as one of their own. But 2 weeks before the wedding, everything changed. The first sign came in the form of a letter, not from Eleanor, not from Nathaniel, but delivered to Nathaniel's office, sealed, marked urgent. When he opened it, he found a threat, not explicit, not crude, but effective nonetheless. The information regarding Miss Ashford's financial arrangements prior to her departure for Paris is extremely interesting. So many people have wondered how a woman without resources afforded 3 years of study abroad. So many people might benefit from understanding the precise nature of your relationship with her during that time. I will be happy to detail these matters publicly unless you are willing to discuss my position regarding the new railroad legislation before Congress. The letter was unsigned. But Nathaniel recognized the nature of it immediately. Blackmail, dressed in polite language. Political leverage. Someone had discovered the story that lay beneath Eleanor and Nathaniel's romance and was prepared to weaponize it. He did not tell Eleanor immediately. He did not want to frighten her. Instead, he did something he had not done in years. He summoned his brother. Oliver came from Boston, where he had been managing their family's separate business interests. He arrived in New York and demanded to see Nathaniel privately. "I received a letter," Nathaniel said without preamble. "Someone has learned about my financial arrangements on Eleanor's behalf. They are planning to use it as leverage to force me to support certain legislation that would benefit their railroad interests." Oliver's expression darkened. "Who? I do not know. Not yet. But I intend to find out. And Eleanor? Does she know? No. And I will not tell her. This is my burden, my responsibility, my mistake for not considering that our arrangement might become public knowledge." "Your mistake?" Oliver said sharply. "Your mistake was that you helped a woman you loved avoid exploitation and destitution." "Nathaniel, for God's sake. If that is a mistake, then I am grateful that you made it." But Oliver's expression was troubled. "There are people in this city who view success like yours, your independence, your refusal to be controlled, your choice to love outside of what society deems appropriate, as a threat. Someone is going to try to destroy that, use it as a weapon against you." Nathaniel knew this was true. He had built his empire on understanding power, how to wield it, how to recognize when it was being wielded against him. He understood the game being played. He simply had not expected it to involve Eleanor. "What do I do?" he asked, and the vulnerability in his voice would have shocked anyone who knew him in business. "You do what you have always done," Oliver said. "You act directly, without apology. You do not negotiate with blackmail, and you do not hide anything that can be used against you. You make it public before they can weaponize it. You tell the story on your own terms." Nathaniel considered this, and then, without allowing himself to reconsider, he made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. He told Eleanor everything. She was furious, not at him, at the situation, at the invasion of their privacy, at the suggestion that her independence, her transformation, could be turned into a scandal, at the fundamental unfairness of a world that celebrated Nathaniel's success but would use Eleanor's survival as a tool against him. "We tell them," she said. "We tell the entire city exactly what happened and why you helped me. We make it impossible to weaponize because there is nothing shameful in it. You responded to a plea for help. You gave me the tools to build my own life. You did not make me dependent. You made me free. That is not a scandal. That is a love story. Eleanor, if we do this publicly, it will dominate every conversation. It will overshadow your career. It will make me a woman who was desperate and was helped by a man who loved her enough to respect her enough to expect her to become herself. Do you know what that makes me? It makes me real. It makes me human. It makes me someone that every woman in New York who has ever felt trapped will look at and see hope. Do it, Nathaniel. Tell them everything." He looked at her. This woman who had been brave enough to transform herself, who had been brave enough to love him honestly, who was now brave enough to face scandal head-on with her head held high. "Together?" he asked. "Always together," she replied. They held a press conference the day after receiving the threatening letter. Nathaniel and Eleanor, standing together, told the entire story. The misdirected letter, the correspondence, the financial arrangement that had allowed Eleanor to build her own life, the years she had spent in Paris becoming herself, the choice she had made to love him freely when she was whole. The city erupted. Some condemned them, called Eleanor manipulative, called Nathaniel foolish, suggested that the entire thing had been a calculated seduction. The society women who had begun to accept Eleanor turned their backs. The newspapers that had celebrated her performances became vicious. But something else happened too. Women began to appear at Eleanor's performances, working women, women without family names, women who had been trapped by circumstance. They came to hear a woman sing who had chosen herself first. who had refused to be saved in the way that women were expected to be saved. They came to see someone who had transformed themselves through talent and will and the support of a man who loved them enough to let them go and become who they needed to be. And Nathaniel, to the surprise of many, became a hero to a different segment of society. To the men who had built New York through industry and effort, who respected self-creation more than inherited wealth, his choice to love a woman like Eleanor was not a scandal. It was evidence of good judgment. The blackmail letter became irrelevant. It had been meant to control them through shame, but they had admitted everything. There was nothing left to hide. The person who had written the letter, it was eventually discovered to be a congressman from Connecticut who was involved in railroad legislation, found that his threat had backfired. Public opinion had shifted against him, not against Nathaniel and Eleanor. 2 weeks later, the wedding took place. It was no longer quiet. Hundreds of people came. The theatre where Eleanor had first performed was decorated with flowers. Artists and musicians filled the pews, and when Nathaniel and Eleanor exchanged vows, it was in front of a community that had been built, quite deliberately, by people who valued transformation and choice and love over tradition and propriety. "I take you," Nathaniel said, his voice steady, his eyes on Eleanor's face, "as my wife. Not as my project, not as my responsibility, but as my equal, my partner, my revolution. I will love you without attempting to contain you. I will support you in building whatever you choose to build. I will spend the rest of my life discovering who you choose to become." "I take you," Eleanor replied, her voice ringing through the church like music, "as my husband. Not as my savior, not as my patron, but as my choice, my mirror, my home. I will love you knowing that I could have chosen any path, and I chose you. I will love you freely, knowing that I am whole enough to do so." And when they kissed, the city of New York, divided though it remained on many things, recognized that they had witnessed something genuine, something rare, something that had survived scandal and threat in the machinery of power. They had witnessed love in its truest form, chosen, earned, revolutionary. 5 years later, the Eleanor Ashford Performance Theatre had expanded. Twice. She had trained dozens of young musicians. She had performed across America and Europe. She had become not just an artist, but a force, a woman who represented the possibility of transformation, the power of choice, the reality that a woman could be complete without being married, and even more powerful when she chose to marry as an equal. Nathaniel had restructured his business empire. He had passed significant control to trusted managers and had instead devoted himself to patronage, to the arts, to women's education, to creating the infrastructure that would allow other women to do what Eleanor had done, build themselves first, choose their futures second. They had a home, a beautiful home filled with books and music and the laughter of a life well lived. They did not have children, that had been Eleanor's choice, but they had built something that would outlast them, an institution, a legacy, a world that was slightly more receptive to women who dared to be themselves. One evening, as they sat by a window overlooking Central Park, the same park where they had walked invisible to each other while visible to themselves, Eleanor took out a box. "Do you know what day it is?" she asked Nathaniel. "Our anniversary," he replied. 5 years since we were married." 5 years, Eleanor repeated. 11 years since that letter arrived by mistake. Do you ever regret it? Any part of it? Nathaniel reached over and took her hand. "I regret nothing. I have lived more truly in the last 11 years than I did in the 40 years before them. You gave me that gift. You gave me permission to be myself." Eleanor smiled and opened the box. Inside were the letters, all of them, carefully preserved, each one annotated now with Eleanor's own reflections written in the margins. 5 years of letters, spanning 11 years of love and transformation, were being made into a book. "I want the world to know," Eleanor said. "I want the women who read this to understand that transformation is possible, that a letter, even a misdirected letter, can change everything. That love, when it is built on the foundation of self-love and self-creation, can move mountains. That a man like you, rare but not impossible, exists in the world. That partnership is possible, that choice is possible, that freedom is possible. Nathaniel pulled her close. Then let them know. Tell them our story. Tell them that the letter that arrived by mistake arrived exactly when it needed to arrive. Tell them that destiny is not fate. It is the sum total of 1,000 small choices to be brave, to be honest, to love fiercely and without apology. And so, Eleanor did. The letters were published under a pseudonym at first, but eventually the truth emerged. The book became a sensation. Women across the country read about Eleanor's journey from desperation to independence to love. They read about Nathaniel's transformation from solitary power to human connection. They read about the possibility of becoming themselves and being loved for exactly who they were. The scandal that had nearly destroyed them became the foundation of their legend. And the letter that had arrived by mistake became the most important correspondence in New York history. Proof that destiny sometimes comes disguised as accident, and that love, true love, always arrives exactly when you are brave enough to recognize it. It was the year 1906. 15 years had passed since Eleanor had mailed that letter to the wrong address. Nathaniel Crane passed away in the spring, peacefully in his sleep. He was 71 years old. Eleanor was beside him, as she had been beside him every day for the previous 15 years. The city mourned him, not just as a railroad magnate, though he had been that, but as a man who had transformed New York's relationship to art and women and the possibility of love outside the boundaries of propriety. Newspapers wrote eulogies. Business leaders came to his funeral. Artists wept. Orphans whose education he had funded lined the streets, but Eleanor did not weep. She was past weeping. She had loved him completely, and had been loved completely in return. She had built a life with him that was full and true, and exactly what she had chosen. She had nothing to regret. She continued to perform for another 5 years. She was 58 years old, and still had the voice of an angel, though now it was a voice that carried the weight of experience, the depth of living fully. She performed less frequently, but when she did, audiences understood they were witnessing something sacred. A woman who had loved and been loved. A woman who had chosen herself, and therefore everything else. A woman who was complete. The letters, hers and Nathaniel's, were eventually published in full, with permission from Eleanor. The book became a classic. Women across the world read about a woman who had transformed herself and a man who had loved her enough to step out of the world as it was constructed and into a world of their own making. Eleanor lived until 1932. She was 89 years old. She had outlived Nathaniel by 26 years, and she had spent those years ensuring that his legacy and her own were one, inseparable, eternal, and transformative. When she died, she left behind not just a fortune, but a foundation. The Crane Ashford Foundation, dedicated to women's education, women's art, women's independence. She left behind students who had become artists themselves. She left behind a theatre that still bears her name. She left behind a world that was slightly, but measurably, more open to the possibility of women becoming fully themselves. But most importantly, she left behind the letters. The proof that love, true love, transformative love, begins when we are brave enough to be honest. When we are brave enough to seek help without losing ourselves. When we are brave enough to let others become who they need to become. When we are brave enough to choose each other freely. The letter that arrived by mistake to Nathaniel Crane was never actually lost. It was always meant to find him. Because destiny is not something that happens to us. It is something we build. One brave choice at a time, one honest word at a time. one moment of radical vulnerability at a time. Eleanor had written to her brother asking for help. Nathaniel had responded from a place of compassion. And together, through years of patience and honesty and the willingness to be transformed by love, they had built something that lasted far longer than either of them did, a legacy of transformation, a testament to the power of choice, and a love story that would inspire generations to come. The story of Eleanor and Nathaniel is not merely a romance. It is a manifesto about the power of choice, transformation, and true love. In a world where women were expected to be passive, Eleanor chose agency. In a world where powerful men were expected to be solitary, Nathaniel chose connection. Both rejected the expectations that society had set and built something new together. The letter that arrived by mistake was not an accident. It was the perfect intersection of destiny and courage. Eleanor was willing to ask for help. Nathaniel was generous enough to respond, and from that moment of mutual honesty, everything changed. This tale reminds us that transformation begins when we are true to ourselves, when we choose ourselves first, and when we find people courageous enough to love who we really are. Subscribe for more stories that celebrate the power of choice, reinvention, and love that defies social conventions. Comment on which part of this journey touched your heart. And watch the next video to discover other stories of extraordinary women who changed their lives.